Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Loadout, presented by The Daily Dot. That's capital T, capital D, capital D, as it always is. And please, as always, remember every single bit of that, or else. I am your loyal and loving host, Jared Wynn, bringing you yet one more night of esports discussion, news, debates, and diatribes here on set live from our beautiful Daily Dot studio. Hope you're ready to join me for this carousel of esports discussion with the one, the only, Sir Richard Lewis. Richard, doing okay today, at least? Getting by?
I'm on the mend. I've tried to have a quiet day because obviously I'm at Gfinity this weekend.
Right.
So I've been trying to just marshal my energy. I built this chair, got myself a nice black computer chair. That's
good.
how I've spent my day pretty much. That's as exciting as it's been.
Looks solid. You built new comfort for yourself, so you can take comfort in that. I appreciate that. It's a good way to spend your time. With Gfinity coming up, especially the chaos. Make sure they don't have any delays, Richard. I expect you to be on top of that. That's your job out there. Keep them in line. All right?
I'll try.
Good. I hope so. We'll get to Counter-Strike later in the show, but we're going to start actually with some league discussion because we have, I'm sure as you know, Richard, some very big news coming across the waves these days in the league arena. We're actually going to start with a more gameplay-oriented issue here. That's Fnatic. But we'll get to some issues with Copenhagen Wolves and with the new team Renegades as they interact with Riot Games in their own special Riot bops everyone on the head sort of way. Starting though with Fnatic, they are now unbeaten. Well, they've been unbeaten, but they are that much closer to being unbeaten for the entire split. They beat H2K today in an impressive victory. They looked like the best team in the West because they most likely are. Hard to find any fault with this squad. With Reckless in the lineup, they have only improved, and that's saying a lot considering they are the defending EU split champions already and took SK Telecom T1 to a 5-game close series at MSI. So very impressive by Fnatic. I'm very impressed by Fnatic, in fact, these days, and I'm not really seeing them being contended with. I'm not seeing any teams being able to upset them, this split, unless, of course, Fnatic just kind of put on the brakes or don't really give a shit. My question to you is, do you see them going a perfect 18-0 this split in the EU? Like, who can challenge them? Will someone challenge them?
I don't think 18-0 will actually happen just reasons of once you get to a certain point where you don't have to try quite so much, you've already qualified, it's already likely you're going to finish first. You're probably going to try and marshal your tactics. You're not going to want to really try quite so hard. Equally, when you get to the crunch time of the season, there'll be people that you're coming up against who will be playing for something. They'll be playing for their own playoff spot or to avoid relegation. And that differentiation in motivation will more than likely lead to an upset, even though, of course, it won't be an upset within the context of what's happening around the season.
Right.
Not only that, though, I think the way that even when you've got a situation like in Europe that where you have one team that's just way out in front of everybody else, it's still quite close together in terms of competitiveness. Fnatic are obviously setting a very high bar right now. All the teams around them actually seem to have somehow weakened over the last split,
right?
And I think that obviously means that, they're going to have a much better win-to-loss ratio this split than they did in the one previous, but there'll still be somebody who upsets them. It'll probably come at a point in the season where, and there's nothing really up for grabs for Fnatic. So I don't see that happening. I do think as well, though, the record will start to prey on their mind a little bit. I never believe any sports person that says, I don't think about records, I don't think about setting personal bests.
Just take it one game at a time, Richard, right?
Yeah, everybody says that, and that obviously is the optimal mindset, but once something's out there, and you know what'll happen, of course, it'll be hyped up from the fans, it'll be hyped up from Riot. Are we going to see a perfect season? This will no doubt be subject to some sort of video featurette if they're to get, if they're to get closer to it, 10-0, 12-0, that'll be dropped at some point. And then when that happens, obviously it becomes more of a reality to the players that, wow, we've got a chance to make history. And even though within the context of a season it won't mean anything, it's an achievement that probably wouldn't likely be bested. So, in terms of having a team having an opportunity to do it, there's definitely never been a better opportunity in the history of competitive League of Legends for one team to do it in one region.
Right.
But like I say, I think that itself will bring its own sort of pressures and psychological aspects that might derail it. So I think they'll get close, but probably is not the 18-0.
I guess the follow-up to that is, do you think it's even worth doing? I mean, for the LCS teams and for Fnatic in this case, obviously the end goal for them, considering what they did at MSI, is to win Worlds, not just contend at Worlds, but actually win, go all the way. Should it be that all their designs, their strategies, their tactics from here going forward are meant to just better organize the team towards Worlds, to get more varied tactics? Like, should there be any concern at all for going 18-0? Or is 18-0 a big enough accomplishment that it does merit some focus, like when they're at 16-0, 15-0, something like that, if they get there, to actually try to make it and go all the way perfect?
I mean, again, I think once you realize you have an opportunity to kind of make that history, it very much depends on the kind of person you are. There are some teams that have that sort of personal level of pride where they actually want to set records and want to have long-standing achievements that won't be beaten. There are others that are like, look, season's long enough. All that matters is just getting the wins, just getting across the finish line. And you see these sort of differing mindsets. Think, for example, the Arsenal Invincibles that didn't want to lose a game famously went to Old Trafford with 50 not out T-shirts under their football shirts, and of course lost to Man United on 49 games undefeated. They still went an entire season unbeaten, but 50 games would have been a nice round sort of landmark figure. It didn't happen for them, but clearly they wanted to do that. Other teams, conversely, will just down tools once they're over the finish line. Chelsea in the Football League this season had some terrible results towards the end of the season, including a 3-0 defeat against West Brom. And Jose Mourinho came out after that, and he just said, the reason we lost this game, you should blame everybody else around us for not challenging us because the season's done already. That's what he said. He didn't even care about the loss. So it totally depends on the individual mindsets. I think Fnatic's roster of players have been so sort of beleaguered right from the start. Nobody believed in them, and slowly but surely they've won everybody over. I can imagine them being the kind of team that would want to set a landmark that's going to stand the test of time, but I still don't think it can be done. I think it would be ridiculously damning, actually. Perhaps a more damning indictment of the European region than anything we could say if Fnatic were to go on to achieve that result.
Yeah, to play 18 games in League, even one draft ban phase can be devastating to a team's potential to actually win a game. So to have 18 go by without a single loss, that does speak poorly to those that are playing, perhaps as much as it speaks to the skill and capability of the team doing the winning week in and week out. So we'll see if Fnatic can get close to that. They're only halfway there now, so it's kind of premature, but it is worth discussing at the very least. It's certainly on a discussion show where we discuss things a lot. Speaking of discussing things, there's a lot of discussion to be had, Richard, about some of the stories that came out this week in the league scene. Dentist, the coach for Copenhagen Wolves, had a bit of a leak, an information leak, and this is a lot of interesting information involved in it. One of the things that stood out to me the most was Freeze being paid salary that was potentially meant for other players' work. Streaming for Azubu, they would stream for 30 hours a week, or 30 hours, a month for Azubu, get paid $2K in compensation, and half of that money would, instead of going to that player, go to Freeze to pay him more after there was overtures by other teams to take him away. Things like that coming out of it, just kind of some mud, basically, to sling around. There's questions over the motivations for why someone would do this leak to begin with on Dentist, for how he handled the situation, if he did things correctly, if he did things wrongly, what he could have done better. So give me your, because you wrote about this, I believe. Give me your initial feeling on this whole situation with Dentist, and we'll dive into it from there.
Well, I mean, first of all, let's talk about the kind of bad atmosphere that's been talked about by the players, the departing Airwax, who himself has contributed to a bad atmosphere in the team in the past. He's not, that's no secret.
Yeah, he called it a horrible atmosphere in his statement on the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was on borrowed time on a number of occasions and seemed to claw it back. I'm guessing now because the organization weren't able to secure better options. So let's assess that bad atmosphere. From what I can tell, the bad atmosphere seems to stem from the fact that Freeze is earning triple the amount of salary anyone else in the team is. And now we can see from these leaked conversations that there's a salary of €1,000, which I imagine is the sort of the baseline for the players. So that and Freeze is getting €3,000. Which obviously, I remember, I think I was doing a show called First Blood at the time. We had Dentist on as a guest, and he said that he'd negotiated a pay rise for Freeze to keep him at the organisation. And this was all predicated on the fact that SK Gaming needed a replacement for Forgiven, who had requested a transfer and said he wouldn't be playing for the organisation again. So the first player they went to was Freeze. And they offered him, I mean, SK Gaming, it's no secret, they have very good salaries. And it's an opportunity to go into a team that had finished, it finished first in the regular season, I think. And then obviously faltered during the playoffs as the team imploded on itself. And even ended up losing the third and fourth place playoff. So at that juncture, the organisation are in a terrible position. They need to retain the services of their star player. Now, what you got to remember about Copenhagen Wolves was up until DigLife acquired a stake in them, Copenhagen Wolves were always a selling organisation. They are not particularly wealthy in esports terms. This is linked to global markets. Denmark's a small country. They've got a very high number of people who are engaged in esports, but very small regional budgets for sponsors. This makes Danish organizations not make a lot of money, and they have to rely on getting kind of almost like government involvement and government money in the form of grants and investment from a group called Danske Metal, who are kind of like an offshoot of, kind of a government agency that deals with technology and youth and obviously more tangentially gaming. I've had dealings with representatives of Danske Metal in the past when I've been writing about the Danish scene, and it's a very progressive scene, but again, the budgets just simply aren't there. So if you're a Danish organization, you have to be a selling organization, you have to be a smart and savvy organization. Copenhagen Wolves have done this historically. If you look at their conveyor belt of players, think about all the players they've had and sold. Think about the Bjergsens, the Forgivens. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. It's not just in League of Legends either. They had, I think, Firebat in Hearthstone as well. This is an organization that's always drafted smart and sold its players. Now, DigLife come in. They're a big company. They're a Norwegian venture capitalist group. Right. They're buying up esports properties and, gaming peripheral companies, things like that. And they don't want Copenhagen Wolves to be a selling organization anymore. They don't want that. They want them to build a team and they want them to succeed. Now, you can't do that if you're willing to let your star players go to an organization that's already finished above you in a previous season. That's not how you become successful. So they had to pay Freeze that money. Now, at that juncture, for me, there are some issues that need to be mitigated, and I would probably point to some poor management internally at this juncture, because once you say to a player, you're a star player, and you're getting paid triple what all your teammates are, you definitely then need to do exercises to keep him grounded. I don't necessarily think it was the wrong decision to tell everyone on the team that he's earning triple the salary, but this is the root of all of the problems. Sources have said that Freeze started acting a bit more cocky, started being a bit more unbearable to deal with his players, started trying to impose his will onto the team, and of course, he's not the captain. Young Buck's the captain, and he's getting paid, a third of what this guy's getting paid. But all right, hey, I'm still the captain. I'm still the model professional. But now all of a sudden he's getting shouted down in games. Management tried to resolve this. Management tried to, let's do some bonding exercises. Let's do some activities. They did this outside of, obviously, playing. Let's get out the game house. Let's go do this. Let's go do that. And it seemed to be working. The players were having fun, talking to each other, enjoying hanging out. But the minute it got back to the game, and the minute things started going wrong, and the minute mistakes were made, they started arguing, they started bickering. And this is all predicated on the fact that one guy is getting paid more than everybody else and has an ego as a result of it. So that's a fracture in the team. Now, I've got to say, with all due respect to the people that maybe have said, oh, it's ridiculous that Freeze is getting 3 times what everyone else. That's bullshit. You look at any sport, the better you are, the more valuable you are to a franchise or an organization, the more you get paid. And if we insist on equality of salary, we're discouraging excellence. It's a ridiculous premise. You've got to pay people what their value is. And evidently, in the eyes of Copenhagen Wolves, whether you agree or disagree, at home, Freeze was deemed to be more valuable. So that's the first point about that. I don't understand why that's caused a lot of outrage. I suppose the outrage stems from the fact that the money they used to inflate Freeze's salary was coming from a streaming deal they negotiated with Azubu. Now, Azubu have released a Reddit post today, which struck me as a very odd way of addressing the situation. And they're saying, oh, we're not going to add Copenhagen Wolves over to Azubu, so I'm guessing this deal's kind of dead in the water now, which could have some financial repercussions for the organisation, because obviously they've got a contract with Freeze. He's entitled to his 3,000 euros. They're going to have to get that money one way or the other. But the way that Copenhagen Wolves have explained it, the agreement they had with Azubu was, for every 30 hours a month that a player streamed, they got $1,000 for the player and $1,000 for the organisation. In Freeze's case, they were giving him the full 2,000, and then they were also taking money that was there for the organisation, and that's how they propped up his salary.
Yeah, and I think this is a big sticking point for a lot of people, because it's basically the other players, there are 4 players working hours to pay their teammate Freeze. Yeah,
and I understand the sense of resentment, but equally, this is the problem, isn't it? I don't necessarily think players need to be bothered with the full details of where the finances come from. All that matters is what you've got an agreement in place to do, how much you're meant to be getting paid. And yeah, it's not optimal, but as I've already said, Copenhagen Wolves as an organisation are struggling to monetize. Right? It's not with the salaries in place that they've got, which regular, recurring amounts of money. The way things are in the organisation, the one thing they could use was the streaming revenue with this deal they'd negotiated with Azubu. That was the only way at that time they could keep Freeze. And let's be clear, they didn't want to do that. They didn't want it to be that way. And I'm pretty sure they didn't want that fact to ever get out into the public domain, which, if you're against it, it makes no difference. If you're for it, it makes no difference. But I do understand why some people find it questionable. I'm kind of leaning a bit more towards that way, but I'm trying to be a bit more balanced and pragmatic in my view. But ultimately, they did want to originally give that money to the players. But if they did that, they don't keep Freeze. They can't give him the money to keep him. So the day-to-day running of an organization, I've done it myself. You make difficult decisions all the time, and ultimately you are going to make decisions that are questionable, especially when pennies are tight and you've got to try and do what's best overall for the team. Now, unfortunately, they've been transparent with the players. That's created this ill feeling. And then when this next bit's got out, I mean, that is the straw that's broke the camel's back. But I mean, you have to understand as well, players were being told quite openly, at the end of this split, chances are you're going to be kicked. because Dig Life are agreeing to fund the acquisition of players. And they just did this with Shuck. There's a rumour going around, €20,000 buyout for him. And Dig Life have footed that bill. So it's a mess. But as I've said many a time on this show, every esports organisation behind the scenes is a mess like this. This is what it looks like. This is the face of the business. Those people getting irate about the conversations need to realize as well, that's just two people in an echo chamber of, hey, how great is Copenhagen Wolves? Just talking up big ideas. If you were to hack the Facebook or Twitter or whatever of any manager, any coach, any young guy with a bit of bravado, players, you would get similar conversations.
Right.
It's not a professional environment when you're having a private conversation across Facebook chat.
Right. I think one of the big questions here is the transparency in particular. That's generally looked at as a good thing. It's good to be transparent with players and with your organization to let everyone know what's going on so everyone can be on the same page. But perhaps this is a case where the transparency actually worked against the organization, against the players, because as you mentioned before, you create the divide between your own players by making clear that one of them is being paid much more than the others. And in fact, that in this case, one of the other players are working to pay that salary. Whether or not that should factor into their considerations is another point entirely. They know it. That's going to be a problem for them. That's easy to see. And you're also telling the player, letting them know their status in the team is very tenuous. It's hard to maintain motivation playing for your team when you feel very confident that team's going to cut you in the matter of weeks or months. Like it's an inevitability that you're not going to be there anymore. So whatever success you're working towards is not even your own success. It's the success of an organization that's going to cut you. The best you can do is play for your next contract, maybe, if they end up cutting you, which you're not sure about because they haven't given you a for sure decision on that. So you can't even look for the next team without potentially violating rules from Riot or something like that. So again, while transparency is often a good thing, and something we encourage, do you think this is a case where it actually came back around and really was harmful to the team? And maybe this is an example of how you have to be selective with your transparency. You can't be transparent about every single thing in your organization.
Yeah, I mean, look, I find it laughable that we talk a lot about the importance of transparency in this business, and I agree. I'm a journalist that's dedicated pretty much all my career to turning over stones. Because I believe that what is in the public interest needs to be out there. And I think organizations could help themselves out immensely if they were willing to be more transparent. But let's be clear about the situation we've got here with League of Legends as a competitive esport. Transparency is the last thing anyone wants. It really is. Fans included, actually. Riot don't want you to be transparent because everybody at home will realize the Emperor has no clothes, that all of this professionalization that they're trumpeting about bringing in, it's all bullshit. Outside of maybe one or two organizations, like I say, they're all a mess. They're all amateur. They're all financially corrupt. In particular in the Scandic and Nordic region, which is turned into an absolute sewer at the moment. But, wherever there's money, there is going to be greed. And there is going to be human nature kicking in. And we're seeing it time and time again in esports. It's not a regulated industry. Nobody wants to be the watchman of this particular business. So Riot don't want transparency. When you have total transparency, you get things like the MYM and Corey situation coming up. And do you think Riot wanted that? Absolutely not. In fact, if Riot were the people that were in charge of what was released into the public domain and what wasn't, you wouldn't hear a single bad thing, even if it meant players had to suffer and live in absolute abject misery like Corey was in that particular situation. That's the nature of the beast. So Riot don't want transparency. And then organizations definitely don't want transparency because it forces Riot to act. They can lose the meal ticket of being in LCS and all the big sponsors that come with it, or rather the bigger sponsors that come with it, or the exposure for the brand, the ego being placated because you get to be on a TV broadcast and you get treated like you're super important, or you lose all of that. And then, of course, on top of it, some of these people are committing things that if it's not criminal, it's borderline. You've got missing salaries, you've got people lying to each other about how money's being utilized. You've got money being appropriated, on the premise that we will do this for you, and then sponsors are going, hang on a minute, you haven't delivered any of the things, and they go, yeah, esports, baby. And they say it's just the Wild West. So organizations don't want transparency. You've seen what transparency leads to. Transparency is very embarrassing. Then you've got internal team transparency. You have to have a hierarchical structure of knowledge. What the CEO knows, what the owner knows, what the managers know, what the coaches know, what the analysts know, and what the players know. It's all, unfortunately, got to be limited and got to be privileged. And you've got to be smart enough to realize who needs to know what. Do the players need to know that it's Dig Life's plan to invest heavily in Copenhagen Wolves and that they're all going to get kicked at the end of the season anyway, no matter how well they do?
Probably not.
Where's the motivating factor in that? There wasn't even an option to the players that they might be sticking around. It was a done deal. You already had Deficio going out and talking to players, and they told the players this. They said, hey, Deficio's out there talking to your future replacements. So I have no idea what they thought was going to happen there. Like how they thought they were going to keep a lid on that. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
What is the motivation there? It's hard to understand what even the motivation would be to do that, I guess, beyond just trying to be nice.
Well, I do understand it. That's the terrifying thing.
Okay.
I do understand it, and I'll tell you exactly what it is. If you look at the history of Copenhagen Wolves, this is an organization that has been... It's been embroiled in ever since League of Legends stuff's been breaking. It's been embroiled in dodgy stuff. The sale of the team to NIP, missing salaries during that whole time. Talk about, because there was some sponsor overlap, hushing it up. You can Google all of this. Copenhagen Wolves went through a rough time. I wrote about it, and I'm friends with the owner. And me and Jacob are like, look, it's all in the game. Still have a drink, still have a beer, but it was gaming.dk, the Danish website that broke the scoop on that, and I was the guy that kind of serialized it all into English and did a bit more digging. Now, when you've been involved in that, I think what you don't then want is you don't want to make it look like you're keeping secrets. So what you do is you go around to all of your players and you're like, look, in the interest of transparency, we're all professional here, yeah? This is just to let you know that, we are actively looking at replacements for you. And just do your job. But unfortunately, again, we're talking about young adults. It's very hard to be... Like, sports isn't like the real world of employment. I know plenty of people who get told in jobs. I live in Birmingham. Our city council is the largest council in Europe. It's the largest single employer in the area. Ridiculous numbers, but it's also had a ridiculous culture of overspend and underpaying people. And they all got stung with a massive lawsuit because they were underpaying people like, grave diggers and dinner ladies. And they had to give them like decades worth of back pay all at once, cost them hundreds of millions. Now, I know people who are being told, you're coming into this department, this is a job, but you've only got a job for 6 months and then you're done. That's it. Or people get told we're going to replace you, and they just go, "That's the nature of the job market. At least I don't have to worry about my rent for 6 months." And they get their heads down and they do their data entry or whatever it is they're doing, and that's the nature of the beast. In sports, it's a little bit different. If you say to a player, "Well, we're going to replace you anyway because you haven't been good enough," and then you pick him in the team, he's so demotivated. What's the chances of him going on a scoring spree or putting in incredible sports performances? And in this instance, you're not even getting the rewards of being a sportsman. You're making minimum wage, right? And you're being told we're gonna take that away from you at the end of the season. So in hindsight, bad call. You've at least got to frame it that we're looking at our options. Yes, we are looking at other players, but if you raise your level of performance, we've got no reason to replace you. I mean, at least frame it like that, right? But they didn't. They were completely honest, and unfortunately, total honesty makes the world collapse around you. Nobody can handle it. So, and then the final on the reasons to hate transparency pyramid is, of course, the fans. Because all of the fans... Dentist was Flavour of the Month 6 months ago. You can check this out. Top thread on Reddit. wow, Dentist and Leviathan are the best like analysis duo of all time. Dentist is so clever, he's so intelligent, so funny. Wow, more shows with Dentist. Oh, Dentist on Summoning Insight. Wow, I can't get enough of Dentist. He is the victim of a crime, right? Having his Twitter hacked, his Facebook hacked, his email hacked. Okay? And all of this information comes tumbling out into the public domain. Coincidentally, just the stuff pertaining to his disciplinary ruling, even though the guy could have rinsed his bank account or anything.
Right.
But no, that didn't happen. The only thing they cared about was the riot ruling. Very strange, right? And people hate him now. People are saying he was a successful coach. Now people are saying he's a dodgy guy. He's involved in career. People just flip like that. And the reality is, he's the same person he was when you were loving him. That they were private conversations. Guess what? People say things in private that are different to what you say in public. That is what we all have to do. So nobody enjoys transparency, evidently, despite everyone crying about how what we need in the industry is more transparency. And I know I'd bang my head against that brick wall for 10 years.
And 10 years more to come, happily, I'm sure. So I guess the last question here is what happens to the team now? They obviously have some issues to deal with. Young Buck has said, the captain, that he is likely to follow the Airwax way right out of the team. Where does that leave them? They brought in, as you mentioned, Shook, with some serious investment there. Are they still going to just reinvest and try to put together a star team? Or are they going? What are they going to do? What's their next best option?
Well, it's a very good point, isn't it? I mean, they are looking to completely rebuild. Obviously, Freeze and Shook are going to be at the heart of the team. I mean, it gets difficult because I think in the LCS rules, you need to retain players between splits, I think. So I don't know how that's going to work. If everybody wants to leave, they're going to have to work something out, obviously. But they want to rebuild, and they want to rebuild with high-profile players. You saw the names that they were talking about. Dig Life were willing to bankroll a move for Reckless. They've bankrolled this move for Shook. They were in talks with Svenskeren, I believe, was one of the players Deficio spoke to. This is the caliber of player they're talking about. I think they want to keep it Scandinavian or Scandic Nordic, whatever you want to call it. That's just seems to be the smart thing to do. But first and foremost, they do want to create what they're calling a super team. And this was in the league conversations as well. Just to speak to the players on the way out, I don't have much truck with Airwax. I'm not too bothered about his grievances whatsoever. He's been a difficult presence within the team persistently. They had to replace him for tantrums within the team. And it took Young Buck, actually, the captain, taking him under his wing, when in fact they were the two initially when Airwax joined the team that were going at it like cats and dogs. And Young Buck invested all of his time into Airwax. And you can see from the statement Airwax released, he's like, Joey's a good friend and a great captain, and he is. Because Airwax used to be like, oh, you're so bad top, I'm never going to gank top. This is stuff that was going on internally when Airwax first joined the team. And this, again, was documented. This all came out in the public domain. And Young Buck put up with all of that. And now, look, he turned it round for him. He invested all that time. This is what I've been saying about Young Buck. It's not what he does on the server. It's what he does privately. And Joey's the guy that I probably feel the most sorry for. Because he's been a model captain, a model employee. He's put up with lots of nonsense in his time at Copenhagen Wolves. He's been persistent through all of the bad times, all of the missing salaries, all of this, all of that. And he's put up with all of it, only to be told you are going to be surplus to requirements no matter how well you play. Thanks a lot. That's brutal. That's not a good way to treat such a faithful servant whatsoever. And in that sense, I think Copenhagen Wolves should probably be a little bit ashamed of themselves where he's concerned.
There's a lot of shaking out to do here. That's for sure. We'll see in the coming months how this turns out and what Wolves will look like in the next split, assuming they may remain in the LCS. We'll have to see about that as well. That's a whole other topic for them to tackle in terms of playing in the game. Now, as if this wasn't enough organizational drama in the League of Legends scene, we had something even perhaps more dramatic. It depends on, I guess, your perspective and what you think is more or less dramatic than something else. But hey, certainly dramatic, regardless of where it ranks with the Copenhagen Wolves story. Chris Badawi was
Yeah.
the owner of Renegades, the new team formed with Monte Cristo co-owning that team. They picked up Misfits, the North American LCS team, or excuse me, Challenger Series team, expected by many to make the LCS. They also picked up the former Vox Illinois Counter-Strike team. So certainly an emergent esports organization in their very early days. And just as they come on the scene, their owner will be leaving the scene, it would seem, at least. He has been asked by Riot, rather politely, to divest his ownership stake and to step away from his ownership stake, his minority stake in Team Dragon Knights that he also has. This was done because Chris Badawi had some overtures to players which were not done in the way Riot would have them done, to Keith and Quas, both under contract with Team Liquid at the time. Quas, of course, has been arguably an MVP caliber talent. This split for Team Liquid, so understandable why someone wanted to go after him and why someone wanted to go after Keith after he played quite well in his stint substituting for Piglet as well. So this is obviously a tough situation for a new organization to immediately have to change ownership situation. It's perhaps no coincidence that Monte Cristo was brought in as a co-owner right before this happened. So your feeling, diving into this subject now, with the owner of Renegades being punished rather harshly, a year-long suspension, I believe it is, from Riot Games for his attempts to poach players from Team Liquid.
And let's be clear, this is a year-long suspension for things he did while outside of the LCS Dominion of Control. Now, I've said, I recorded a YouTube video the other day. I was pretty tired. I'm sure I didn't cover all the bases as thoroughly as I could, but I did a little 20-minute video. And basically the summation is this. So, first of all, when it comes to the ban they've issued, it's unprecedented within their game. It is unprecedented within their game. They haven't issued punishments that severe for anything. For anything. And I want you to think about some of the crazy shit that has gone on. And again, we come back to MYM, who remain an absolute carbuncle, in esports, and their time in the LCS is just horrifying to me. The things that were going on with them, despicable. They got a $5,000 fine, the bulk of which was paid by the player that had been threatened, bullied, and forced into feeling like he was leaving. And Riot were okay with that because apparently, Corey had made mistakes as well. So think about how repellent that is, just in a nutshell. And that's before we even get into all the other jiggery pokery that MYM were getting up to, just to even get their tawdry 5 minutes of fame in the LCS. Right? So that organization was deemed fine. They were deemed acceptable. Okay? Then you have CLG. Right? Poaching, not once, but twice. Dropped out of the league at one point as well, just to go to Korea so they could train for Worlds. And of course, we all know how that worked out. Playing ringers and completely subverting the outcome of the league, a direct affront to competitive integrity. Although I did think the move was hilarious at the time. It was the ultimate finger to Riot. But it's, but let's just focus overall on the poaching issue. They successfully poached players from Team Dignitas. Successfully did it. Successfully got them to not renew their contracts. Successfully made them offers. For both Skara and Zion Spartan. They did it in secret. And they lied about it when confronted, which is one of the reasons why they're saying, we warned Chris Badawi about it, and he went and did it again anyway. So CLG did it twice and lied about it. And they got a $10,000 fine, and everyone was like, wow, that's steep. Didn't see anyone saying Hotshot needs to take a step back as owner or divest his share in the company for improper practices. Didn't see that. Did see an apology that was put forward where he was like, I haven't lived up to professional standards, blah, blah, blah. But certainly it was never even brought up. It was never questioned. And indeed, when these tampering allegations were brought to light, again, by myself, for then Team Misfits and Chris Badawi talking to Team Liquid. The conclusion from most of the community was, well, Riot won't be able to do anything and probably won't do anything and probably shouldn't do anything because they're an amateur team. They're playing ranked fives.
Right.
So, I mean, they weren't even, technically they weren't even an organization at that point. There was no paperwork. They were just a group of friends. Now, this brings me on to the next point, and that is appeasement. And that is what this punishment is about. It's no secret. I've talked about it a lot. There is a cabal, a group of managers. In fact, cabal is the wrong word because we all know who they are. And it's, made up of TSM, Cloud9, used to be CLG, kind of still is a bit, maybe, now and then. And, of course, now Team Liquid, formerly Curse. And they've come together and they operate together and operate in each other's interests. They have open channels of communication. They've effectively created a union, which I think is, this collective bargaining isn't a bad idea. I'm not against it. I've been talking about the need for something like this, especially when you use it to leverage, slime like Riot. I think it's a good thing. But here's the problem. Because they're the only group that have anything even close to leverage over Riot, then when it comes to punishments like this, when they put their complaints in about the actions of Chris Badawi, who used to be associated with Team Liquid in some capacity, that's when you've got the problem. So what Riot have done here is they've come in to ultimately appease the group who are like, well, hang on, this guy, look, he's running around, he's talking to our players. We can't have that, Riot. You're meant to be protecting us. We're your big brands here. So Riot have acted accordingly, and it's to appease the people over there. Again, it's unprecedented what's happened. And the third point that needs to absolutely be said is that they haven't even been honest in what they've published in their ruling. And that is quite simply that they have taken a quote out of context to misrepresent what Chris Badawi said to Keith. Now, at the time, when Chris Badawi added me because I reported about the tampering issues, he told me exactly what had happened. And he showed me a quote. And the quote was basically him saying to Keith, oh, I realize now I'm paraphrasing here. Sure. But it was along the lines of, I realize now that I was wrong. I was a little bit out of my depth. I didn't really know what the approach was, and I shouldn't have spoke to you. I'm now talking with Steve Arhanset / Team Liquid directly. Can we just pretend this whole conversation never happened? Meaning, can we just start from scratch? Not, let's lie about it. There was nothing to lie about at that point. They'd already agreed a buyout fee for Keith of, I believe, $4,000. Now, at that juncture, there isn't any deception going on. And the only reason the deal didn't go ahead was because the Piglet situation arose and Keith needed to be kept on to motivate Piglet. So Riot have took that line, let's pretend this conversation never happened. Again, in the same way that, Jared, me and you were talking to a girl at a bar and we make a rubbish joke and she's about to walk away and you go, can we just pretend that never happened? What you're saying is let's start over. You're not saying, can we create a fiction and fantasy land that we live in? Of course, you're not really saying that. Right. But Riot have represented that as being an absolute fact. And it's disgraceful, frankly. So then to the second point, the Quaz issue, and again, Chris, when he wanted to give me a statement, we talked about it. He obviously, like I say, he used to be associated with Team Liquid. I think Quaz used to come to him for counsel. I don't think Quaz at the time was particularly happy for whatever reason, and he was saying, "I don't know what to do." And I think Chris said something along the lines of, well, your contract will expire. You don't have to renew it. Now, that isn't the same as saying, don't renew your contract. And in fact, the only rules, if I remember rightly, about that Riot even have in place when it comes to tampering is that if you ask another player directly, what is your buyout, or encourage them to activate their buyout, or encourage them to leave the organization, if you do any of those things, it's tampering. Saying to a player, maybe you shouldn't renew your contract, that isn't quite the same as those things. So you either need to add it, and if you're doing it, you're adding it retroactively, and therefore Badawi's got to be immune from punishment for that, or you're just gonna we can just make it up and do whatever we want. It wasn't the same. It's not the same issue. So, and then that was followed on by, if you do not decide to renew your contract and you find yourself without a team, there will always be room for you in one of my teams. This is not poaching. It's just not poaching. It's not professional. It's really stupid and naive, and he's a trained lawyer and he should know better, but it isn't poaching. And Riot have represented it as such. And that is nonsense that has been allowed to happen. Absolute nonsense. Yeah. I hear more damning conversations in an average weekend at an event than that. Right. All the time. That is the nature of the business. Over drinks at the end of the thing. So what's happening with you? Would you join our organization? How much salary do you get? Blah, blah. Is this poaching? It's. I understand the line needs to be drawn, and I've always said tampering, tortious interference, all of that stuff, bad for the industry. Contracts need to be honoured and respected. But I do not think Badawi is the worst example of that. In fact, CLG almost certainly is, and yet they have been allowed to skate purely and simply because of their brand value. Oh, and the final point, Jared, how could I even forget this? Sure. Strikes me as a very odd coincidence that a man who is publicly saying, we need to change this system, Riot protect the big organizations, Riot don't look out for players, quote, players get fucked in this business. That's the guy who gets singled out for an unprecedented punishment, is it? How very convenient.
It would seem to be. It would seem to be convenient. So, as you said, some naive comments probably made, but framed out of context, especially the ones where you tried to convince someone, to forget this ever happened. Because, as you said, in the ruling, the forget this ever happened quote was definitely framed in the context of, let's just pretend that I didn't make this overture to you because I know I'm in the wrong and could get in trouble for it and don't want to. So let's subvert Riot's investigation. Let's kind of go beyond them. And that's the reasoning, that lying, that purposeful subversion of Riot's investigation, of them enforcing the rules. Yes. And again, the rules that may not actually exist the way they are being enforced here. So it's hard to subvert rules you don't actually know exist.
Now, I'll be open. Please. If Riot can produce, or if anyone else can produce, a quote that says words to those effect, I'm open to seeing that and believing it's genuine. But the quote I have seen, which seems suspiciously like the one they've used in making this statement about his inherent dishonesty, it has been massively misrepresented and taken out of context.
I guess my question for you then, considering that, is, do you think this is a move of Riot appeasing the organizations who do have, as you mentioned, some actual leverage against them, the organizations like Team Liquid and CLG? Do you think it's a matter of them not taking a personal liking to Badawi and thinking, you know what, let's get this guy out of our hair before he gets into our hair? Is it a combination of these things? Like, what is the motivation from Riot's perspective if they have blown out of proportion some of the allegations here and certainly have given him a stiffer punishment than we've ever seen before?
Look, it's a bit of both. I mean, I've talked about this at length. People think I'm a paranoid fantasist, but this is absolutely true. When somebody enters into the League of Legends orbit, they are immediately marked by Riot employees, and they are monitored. That's just simply how it operates. There are dossiers on anybody who wants to be involved in League of Legends as a player, as a manager, as an owner, as a coach, as a journalist. And everything you have said and done is sort of kept. And if at any point any of it doesn't fit the Riot message, then you become labelled. And again, I've actually heard this term used. It was used at the Teamers conference where they were talking about ways that they could shut down independent journalism breaking stories. The term they used was undesirable. Undesirable people, undesirables. So it was quite clear right from the get-go that Badawi had a very strange relationship with Team Liquid. I don't think the parting of the ways there was particularly good. He had basically come into esports not knowing what he was doing. He annoyed and irritated everyone. Actually, when I first spoke to him, he irritated me immensely. I told him I thought he was a moron. And I'm sure he'll be happy to regale you with that anecdote because I couldn't quite believe the things he was saying or the things that he was talking about in an esports context, especially from a legal background. It blew my mind. He was very hippy-dippy in this whole let's change the system, man, when in actual fact what we need is more structure, not more free-form approach and laissez-faire attitudes. That's what always comes back to bite us in the business. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So quite clearly, at that point, people talk. And people talk to Riot and Riot employees. And then notes are made, right? And people want to get to know what he's all about. And, oh, hang on, didn't he have something to do with Team Liquid? Yeah, and he poached these players. And obviously Riot already knew about that. They said they'd already spoke to him about it. They said they'd already warned him about it. At that point, you're on the shit list. You're never getting off it. No one ever gets off the Riot shit list. You're on there for life, right? And then, of course, there's another incident. There's him talking publicly about how Riot protect big organizations and don't look after the players, when Riot are always publicly saying, we put player welfare first. Nothing to substantiate that anywhere. They just say it. There's no evidence. But that's whatever, okay? They're allowed to just say it, I
Sounds
suppose.
good.
Yeah, sounds good, right? Sounds good, just like the visa story. Sounds good. And of course, he's saying, Riot, don't do that. And I know they read that article. And I know they read these articles and they keep it on a database and so they can go back and refer to it. So there was no way that they were going to allow him to just skate into LCS, which he almost certainly would do at the first time of asking with the team he's assembled and the resources he's got at his disposal. That was never going to happen. It was never going to be allowed to happen. So they've stretched the rules to, as far as they absolutely can, just to ensure he feels the wrath of Riot. And nobody can stop them. There's no appeals process. Nobody can do anything about it. And here's the best part. It's a year suspension, but as with all Riot suspensions, it doesn't mean it ends at the year. It means they review it. So all of these rulings, it's the same. When you're banned under Riot, they say we're banning him for 6 months. What they mean is reviewing it in 6 months. They're very clever in the use of language there. And if in the 6 months you've done anything they don't like, guess what? Appeal rejected. Have another 6 months. It's like being Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He goes to the mental institution thinking it'll be easier time and he'll get out when his sentence ends, and then he realizes actually in a mental institution you don't get out until the nurse signs you off, and that's the nurse he's been fucking with the entire movie. That is the Riot way, and it's appalling, but there's nothing anybody can do about it. So I absolutely agree, because I've seen it time and time again that Badawi had his card marked, and this is them letting him know, if you want to be involved in our esport, which at the moment is a license to print money, you do it our way or not at all. And it's particularly tough now. He's got a co-owner. What do you think Monte Cristo makes of all of this? So now Chris is in the position, do I fight it and potentially have my appeal rejected? Do I go on the warpath and talk about how unfair it all is? And then you're potentially bringing the team and Monty down with you. Terrible position to be in. Riot know that, and they're going to take advantage.
Yeah, his only public statement so far, Monte Cristo's, has been to say that it doesn't change things with the team. So they are apparently going to try to soldier forward in some way. How that soldiering works out exactly remains to be seen, and I'm sure it's going to play itself out in the coming weeks and months, as will the situation with Copenhagen Wolves. Now, before we close this segment of the show, and we have another one coming up, so stick with us. A very brief note actually. In CS, you are going to Gfinity Masters this weekend, Richard. You're going to see. I saw a matchup actually on the schedule that caught my eye, and I had a flicker of deja vu, if you will, some memories. NIP versus SK. I was for a moment, just a fleeting moment, brought back to a simpler time in esports, a more precious time, if you will. And then I recalled that this SK Gaming team is a minor Danish outfit that's already replaced one of its players, and NIP are coming in with a 10-game, 11-game winning streak after the struggles they've had recently. And it's not quite the shining match that it once was. Does it do your heart any good to see NIP versus SK on the scoreboard, or is it just a matter of SK Gaming coming up here and then bottoming out?
I mean, look, it's always good because you can talk about the history, but in the same way that the Fnatic SK Gaming in League of Legends, everyone says, oh, it's the Clasico, it's El Clasico. That's not quite the case anymore, or is it? Who knows? It was at a time when those organizations were a lot closer together in terms of ability. It's the same that now that NIP and SK is a bit of a nothing match ultimately. NIP should absolutely crush the SK Gaming lineup. There's nothing that indicates SK Gaming are in the same league. And I think SK Gaming kind of know that. They got themselves what they considered to be the best available team after they got outbid by Kingwin for the team that they did have their heart's desire set on. And this is ultimately a group of placeholder players that will be slowly tinkered with and replaced if they don't live up to par. The first casualty of which, of course, was Hunden.
Yeah, it's already happened, as a matter of fact. Yeah, already had a replacement there. Pretty fast, actually. So, yeah, it's not quite Heaton and Potty against their old teammates, all in Fisker. Not quite that sort of matchup. But still, as an old Counter-Strike soul, as I am, it's nice to see these names coming together once again, even if it's only kind of a remembrance of what once was. Now, thanks, as always, to Richard Lewis for joining us. Sir Richard Lewis, I should say. Should give him his full title. I wouldn't want to disgrace the Queen and Crown and bring Richard on for the show. Stick around with us. In a few minutes, we'll have a nice League of Legends breakdown for you of the day's action in the European LCS, tomorrow's preview, as well as the North American LCS preview for the weekend. So stick with us for that. If you like the channel, follow it right now. Don't wait. Follow right now. This instant. Back soon.